Welcome to the Fermynwoods Contemporary Art Podcast, guest curated and presented by Subterra. In search of solace in this precarious world, we emerge from ocular darkness. Rays of light pierce through the nocturnal, and in these twinkling soundscapes, we are reminded that we are part of something greater than ourselves. As we navigate these curious and luminous spaces, we will explore artist talks, discussions, and original commissioned sound art. Hello everyone! Somehow we have entered 2025, and through what felt like a very long and dark December, it is my pleasure to emerge from 2024 and to share a little bit of love and light with the newest episode of the podcast, Tread Softly Because You Tread on My Dreams by Sarah Long. And though this title, borrowed from the famous Yeats poem, is a bit tongue-in-cheek, like much of Sarah's work, it does still capture the quietly sparkling sentiment of love and light through its exploration of bygone pasts and potential futures. Sarah Long is an Irish artist and writer whose practice spans painting, text, and performance. Sarah focuses on suppressed female archetypes, nationhood, and myth, and positions the body in the tradition of landscape to contest the historical male gaze. She's interested in embodying the patriarchal Mother Ireland literary figure, particularly Mother Ireland's ability to house contrasting visions, and probes the potential for expanded thinking around the construct of the female condition. Her debut novella, WW, was published by Bloomers in 2024. And this autofiction work follows the trials and triumphs of an aspiring artist and writer and repositions the female figure away from cultural symbols and towards cultural makers. Her work was selected for Periodical Review 14, organised by Palace Projects and Studios in Dublin in 2024. And upcoming solo shows include the South Tipperary Arts Centre later this year. Tread Softly Because You Tread on My Dreams performs a fluid girlhood that invites the listener into the confidence of the autofictional character Mary. She shares her strange visions in an effort to decipher their meanings. The work plays with the notion of the Ashlyn, an Irish poetic genre where the nation appears to the poet in a dream in the form of a woman. Mary's dreams offer a critique of inherited language and storytelling systems, while highlighting themes and motifs that reverberate throughout Irish culture, such as the impact of colonialism, Celtic mythology, and an affinity with the land. This work is part of a larger autofiction project, Death and Dreams, that encompasses painting, performance, sound, moving image, and long-form text. The work engages with the Mother Ireland figure and reflects on repressed feminine archetypes. Thinking through the interchangeability of mother and woman in the Irish Constitution, this body of work seeks to relate the female to the Jungian archetype of the trickster or the shapeshifter over the traditional mother role. The narrative follows Mary, the autofictional character, an aspiring artist and writer in conflict with the world around her. Throughout the prose progression, Mary begins to emerge from a painting she finds herself trapped within. So, without further ado, here is Tread Softly Because You Tread on My Dreams by Sarah Long, followed by a fascinating discussion with Sarah.
Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams.
Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams.
I gave her poems to say.
Tread
I
softly,
gave her poems to say.
because you
I gave her
tread
poems
on
to
my
say.
dreams.
I gave her poems to
Because
say.
you tread on my dreams. My dreams.
Okay, I think we should turn on all the lights because I've been having the weirdest fucking dreams. I don't usually have dreams. Well, if I do, I usually forget them, unless I have someone to tell, like right away, within the first couple of minutes of waking, when my eyes are still swimming in woolly pools of colour, and my throat feels thick and a little dry. It is in these scanty moments before the day slaps me across the face in all its cocksure splendour that I can recall my dreams. My future self, aging peculiarly with hair that grows darker with each coming year, never turning grey. A wolf in my childhood bedroom, being forced to return to work in places I despise. I know, of course, that the only person who is supposed to care about your dreams is your lover. It's the best part of being in love, if you ask me. You roll over and begin to direct your ramblings to the heat on the other side of the bed, your husky tone adding a welcome eldritch air to the visions. I know you usually only tell your dreams to your lovers, but won't you love me? I had a dream. William Martin Murphy whispered in my ear I was a good girl. He followed me around all day long. When I was in the post office collecting my job seekers, when I was standing in front of the painting of the pretty woman off the old banknotes at the Crawford Art Gallery, even when I was scrolling through the journal.ie comments sauntering around Paul Street. He followed me until I had had enough of him, and I goes, "Look, you'd want to fuck off now, okay?" I didn't say it in a nasty way. I kind of laughed, exasperated, like he was being a bit of a rogue and I was all for fun and games, but I had to get on with my day at some point. And surely be to God he could see that. I'm going to have to do a food shop in a minute and I can't have you feckin' hanging off me like a bloody gone bean. He started growling then, real low and menacing like. I was starting to get pretty pissy by now, so I said, "Go on away now, you feckin' tosser. Would you go away, you string of piss?" And then he bit me. It was fucking insane. He bit me. His two front teeth sank into my upper arm, and I had to shake him off because he had clamped down on me. And then he said the strangest thing. He said, "We don't die, and the greatest trick we've ever managed to pull is to convince people that we do." And it was fucking depressing the way he said it. But then I thought it was kind of glorious too. And he whispered in my ear, "Now forget all about me like a good girl. Forget I'm here at all and go on away about your day. Go on away about your life. There's a good girl." Some other strange things happened in the dream too, of course. Like the bins were overflowing on all the streets because the lads were on strike, and James Connolly was singing a queer tune. Jimmy Hoffa was there too, only he wasn't really Jimmy Hoffa. He was Al Pacino speaking in an Irish accent saying, "Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in." He was asking people to sign up to a union, but when I got closer, I saw it was just a form for a Tesco club card. Anyway, I ended up running and running, because I'm terrified now, you see. I'm sweating, and for some reason the Gardaí are chasing me at this stage, and I turn the corner and I'm somehow on O'Connell Street. And I see the big Jim Larkin statue in the middle of the street, and I see his hands high above his head, and realise he's no longer preaching or proclaiming, but yelling and screaming to God to pull him out and save him from this shit show. We don't die, and the greatest trick we've ever managed to pull is to convince people that we do. I woke up around this point, but I couldn't get these words out of my head. We don't die, and the greatest trick we've ever managed to pull is to convince people that we do. I'd always thought that being dead meant that you would be bloody or rotting in some way. So I was terrified when my family gathered in the funeral home to say goodbye to my granny. My mother said I didn't have to look in the coffin if I didn't want to, but my dad, offended that I wouldn't look at the woman he adored, lifted me up, and there I saw her lying. Small, perfect, and dressed in blue. I'm here now and she's gone. But she's not gone because I'm here now, and I still remember how she told me it wasn't nice to purposely roil my sister, and how she thought a farm should be run. I guess the same thing goes for our pal Willie. Someone absent-mindedly popped him in their pocket and he festered away in there until he was driving them by the seat of their pants. Or he caught hold of a light wind and swung himself into the badly lit part of a pub, and in time you could begin to hear some strange mutterings spilling into pints. Or worse still, he became the warm air in a stuffy little office, and his voice would ring out in a screech every time a chair was pulled back with a scrape at the end of a business meeting. In fact, I think if he were just to wait out there in the fields, some feckin' sap would come along to lick him off the rocks and end up saying something silly like, "Isn't it grand holidays the teachers get?" Or, "Nobody wants to work these days," with a straight face. Anyway, to tell you the truth, the reason why I'm telling you all this, well, the really mad thing is, my arm has been kind of sore ever since. I know it sounds mad, I just said it was mad. Look, you can laugh all you want, but all I know is the top of my arm is a bit achy, right where he would have bit me. And I swear I'm starting to think it wasn't a dream at all.
I gave her poems to say.
Tread
I
softly
gave her poems to say.
because you
I gave her
can.
poems to say.
If I was to tell you the truth, I would tell you that I do have a girlish desire to tell you my dreams. To twirl my hair around my finger, smack my lips and divulge. If I was to tell you the truth, which again I am fairly uneasy about, I've been having a recurring dream that I could do with some help deciphering. I will present this dream in the third person because, as you will of course know, monologues are the cancer of our times. We've all, especially us bloody women, got into our heads, and honestly, I can't think of a worse place to be.
"1969. Yes, this dream, like all good dreams, came with a delivery date. Eamon de Valera, the long fellow, the man who cheated death, sits in the big office like an overgrown bot scribbling at a desk. Thin Lizzy is forming. When they say it's all over, it's not all over completely. Phil Lynott is piping up from the Greek chorus. The troubles are a bubbling over up north. And over on Telephus Air Inn, the ghost of Michael Collins is off to the moon. Mick is one of our dear plenipotentiaries. Y'are know, that old Roald Dahl trick where one feller is remarkably thin and the other astonishingly rotund? Well, for the sake of the story, it's a bit like that. There is a big fellow and a long fellow. Everyone is very taken by their differences. Like chalk and cheese, they say. Although really they aren't all that mad unlike each other, other than of course that one is dead and the other isn't. At the televised rocket launch, the big fellow stands close to the camera, eyeballs it and says,
"The history of this nation has not been, as is so often said, the history of a military struggle of 750 years, it has been much more a history of peaceful penetration of 750 years. It has been a story of slow, steady, economic encroachment by the empire."
This year we got rid of the farthings and halfpennies, so money was on everyone's mind. We were still busy untying ourselves from empire. The Irish farthing replaced the British farthing a few years earlier as a symbolic demonstration of national identity, but we were still pegged to it economically. All bound up in the purse strings. The farthing wren became the woodcock, a short, fat, largely nocturnal bird that favours dense cover. It lurks in the thickets, the shadowy underbrush, the dark side of the woods amongst the dead leaves and memories. A group of woodcocks incidentally is known as a foal, and we were still very much in the process of foaling, and foaling out. Not quite having found the ground, not knowing really where to land, or very much about this land we had been removed from. Collins designed the badge for the mission and put this queer little bird on it as a symbol of a hunting target. Meanwhile, the other news story on everyone's lips, Beckett wins the Nobel Prize for writing of the destitution of modern man, telling us over and over and over how absurd it all is, our will, and what we will do to will it. But that's the old story by now really, it no longer gets the tongues wagging, and the new ones are all filled top to bottom with dramatic irony. There is a bomb under the table and under the fridge and under the carpet and your bed. We sit in the dark, passive, looking on aghast with goosebumps running up and down our arms and legs. We are not the actors but spectators of the SAG with a building tension, for we, of all people, know what's coming. We watch as the American puts his toothpick right into that big piece of cheese. The flag flies. From a strong bow to an Armstrong, the project of empire continues. Collins is instructed to orbit the moon 30 times. The woodcock parts from Agnes Clerk, the main spacecraft, and Collins embarks alone around the dark side of the moon. He does not mind all that much really, being alone. He looks out over the side of the spacecraft and sighs in slight relief. He thought it rather nice actually. The other two were a bit too keen to be waving flags and crunching their boots for his liking. They were awfully eager to get the moon on the underside of their foot. It got him away from all the rule-a-boo lie-you down below too. They breed like rabbits and multiply like vermin. And it's people who are here and it's people who are divided. And whatever you say nothing. And we are born into an unjust system. We are not prepared to grow old in it. The bodies were rising from the bog, so it seemed as good a time as any to shoot off into space and clear the head for a bit. Big Mick stares out the window and sees Earth disappear out of sight. He looks at the moon's brilliant surface and his guts start bubbling. He starts to feel queasy, which is odd, as he is a ghost after all. Bile begins to rise up his esophagus. Big Mick, with sickly lucidity, realizes we have, for hundreds and thousands of years, been looking at the one side of the moon. The one face. The one direction. The one destiny. We are on a doomed waltz around the Milky Way. Mick, panicking now, begins to think, what am I doing here? I've been sent on behalf of the Irish people to come back with the best deal possible, but this just feels like collusion. This is just more of it. More of all that madness. More cutting and carving in the name of empire. More lines, more borders, more pomp, and more ungodly divine order. He curses Dev for sending him on this foolish mission. He cries out.
When you have sweated, toiled, had mad dreams, hopeless nightmares, you find yourself in the cold and dank in the night air. Think, what have I got for Ireland?
At that moment, with Collins on his knees, sweat dripping from the back of his legs, his chest heaving with the goddamn irony of it all, Glasgavlan, the magical cow of endless bounty, appears. Welcome to the dark side of the moo. Oh, fuck this, says Collins as his toes curl in on top of one another, and his teeth itch the inner of his lips. Fuck this. I don't have time for your silly bon mots. His hairline tightens and the backs of his earlobes experience a blinding, shooting pain. I am tied up in Empire. I'm sent on a doomed mission by that stringy fecker, and things are kicking off back home, and it's all just spiraling and spiraling like this fecking galaxy. I fear we are on a one-way march. I fear we can't go back and we can't go forward, and we are just stuck. I fear we are stuck. I fear the drums. I fear their rhythm. It's a one-way march. It's on and onwards, and that's it. It's incessant, and it doesn't seem to matter. No, it doesn't seem to matter. The screaming, the yelling, the fighting, the babies born into terrible, terrible violence. It won't stop. It won't stop because the ghosts still have their say, the likes of me and hundreds of others. We are still rattling around in this machine, helping it run. The cow graciously listens. Her lowing is sweet and light and echoes the tune of a lullaby that's meaning has long been forgotten. When Collins finishes his ranting and raving, he begins to dry heave. A roaring guttural sound thunders up his body, from his toes to his throat, causing his teeth to vibrate with a low hum. Glasgabline soothes the fallen soldier, with hushes, and magics up a glass of milk to cure him of his ailments. The dark side of the moon is so called not because there is no light here, it is dark because it is unknown to us. Let the dream of empire die. Back on Earth the news comes through. 2 astronauts, stranded on the moon, and 1 lost to space forever. The shock of it causes ructions up and down the country. A rescue mission is organized for the 2 boys and a vigil for the big feller. Dev, with his 2 feet under his desk and a grim expression, pens.
May God grant. No. May we, the people, may we the people have the skill and courage which have enabled man to alight upon the moon, and will enable him, also, to secure peace and happiness upon the earth and avoid the danger of self-destruction.
I know, what a cliche. I am très pastiche. I am terribly fucking cringe altogether. You can't just write about your dreams, Mary. Holy Mary, Mother of God, you need to subvert tropes, you dumb bitch. I am a parody. My silly little words are my silly little effacement. I am a rendering of. What you need to understand is, I am ribbons on a tree. I am Mary. Mary, quite contrary. I am the dream, the ashling. I am the dream and the nightmare. I am the dream
And the nightmare.
I gave her poems to say. 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 I gave her poems.
Yeah, so it's like part of like a project called Death and Dreams, which I'm currently doing. So it's like very much in it at the minute. So this is like what it's supposed to be doing, or like what it's supposed to be at some point. So I have like this character called Mary, who's an autofictional character. And I developed her during the masters with you,
At,
Marie.
at art
Uh,
writing in Glasgow School of Art.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. So Mary's kind of like she's an autofictional character, so she's like a stand-in for me, but she's also like this represent or like a modern representation of Mother Ireland figure. But what I really like about this character is like that she's really, really girlish, and she can kind of occupy this kind of coming of age kind of voice, that like can speak kind of with like a criticality that only like teenage angst can kind of do, or like kind of like occupy, like do you like the kind of Holden Caulfield of it all, but it's like a little bit like um someone who's just kind of feels like they're observing, or feels like they're just like a little bit more critical, but in like a very what's the word, intimate kind of way.
Yeah.
So I like playing with that voice in particular, the kind of intimacy, and I guess the kind of framing of it as being about like um dreams, and this kind of like creating this girlish space, because she's in her bedroom. So I'm trying to write like a long form text, because recently wrote, well, yeah, recently wrote a story about Mary called WW. Yeah, so it's kind of a carry on from that story. So in this like more longer form text, like Mary is like situated in her bedroom, and she's like finds herself stuck in these different paintings, and I'm trying to like trace back this particular facet of the Mother Ireland figure that's like maybe has a relationship to colonialism. And I'm very much just like in the research part of this, but I'm trying to like make a connection back to like maybe classical ideas of women, and like the First Empire, and kind of like Roman ideas, and how that like visual construction of woman in art. So she's stuck in her bedroom while this is happening. And then while this is happening in parallel, well, I guess the significance of her being stuck in her bedroom, as well as you know, Marie, in the Irish Constitution, woman is enshrined in the home. So it's kind of like this kind of like confinement, or this like limitation on her, that she's in her bedroom, and then she's like telling her dreams. So I guess the idea of her like relaying her dreams is kind of a subversion of the poetic genre, the ashling, where like the it's kind of from like the 17th century, 17th or 18th century, predominantly, where like the figure of Ireland appears to the poet in the form of like a usually a beautiful woman, although sometimes an old hag. But but yeah, and that like usually it's kind of like saying about the plight of Ireland, or like the kind of a call to arms, or kind of like that they're like a damsel in distress, and like kind of languishing, and being like, oh yeah, looking for freedom and that. So I guess Mary is telling her dreams about that kind of reflect on the state of Irish culture as well, and like different dream or different what are the words, different kind of ideas that keep like reverberating in Irish culture, and they kind of feel like they're not going away, and they just kind of repeat.
Something I've been thinking a lot about recently, and I remember writing about this for my undergraduate dissertation, was I think it was in a paper by a writer called Antosic Parsons, I think is her surname. And I think she writes on Irish performance art, or at least she used to. I'm not sure if she still is. She did contribute some essays to that book that was published in 2015 on Irish performance art. Was it 2015?
Yes.
Something around that time.
Yeah.
Where she said that even the symbol of the potato as this kind of asexual plant, which doesn't need to be defiled by sex in order to reproduce, is like another way that land and woman are associated together in Irish culture, and like why the potato like is such a perfect symbol for that. And I just thought, yeah, I just think that's so like it's so ingrained, it's so deeply ingrained.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I think I liked it that I guess, yeah, the poems that I've referenced, like the kind of I gave her poems to say, which is like a line from
Is it
Raglan Road, which
Raglan Road? Yeah, I thought
yeah,
so.
Yeah, and then the like tread softly because you tread on my dreams. And I guess I was thinking about Ivan Boland's Mother Ireland poem, and I
Yeah.
think that's like I feel like that's something I just think about like on the regular, like pretty much every day. Because it's just so like powerful, her framing of yeah, it's very simple, like the kind of this idea that it's like, oh, I'll like say some lines from it there that I remember. It's like I lay on my back to be feels, um, and night and day words fell on me, and then
Mm.
I rose up to tell my story, and it was different than the one told about me, and that part is
Oh,
really nice.
yeah.
And this kind of like realizing how constructed these ideas are, and how yeah, how ingrained they are, like you say. So I guess I'm looking at in just like from this text expanding out into ferns, and I made a video alongside it as well. So I've been looking at like the fern plant as kind of this symbol, I guess, moving away from the idea of the potato because the yeah, I guess I just playing around with that idea. I actually think it was from a conversation with you before, Marie, where we were talking about the trickster
Oh,
archetype.
yeah. I saw
And
that
I was
reference.
yeah, so I was thinking about how, like, in the Irish Constitution, woman is like kind of used interchangeably with mother, and then I was thinking about the mother archetype, and then maybe like repositioning woman towards like the trickster, because I think there's a lot about woman that's like shapeshifter or kind of like amalgamate lots of different things. So
Hmm.
I thought like a nice kind of symbol for that was like the fern, which has like a lot of folklore or like mythology around the idea of like how it reproduced and that it could reproduce sexually or asexually, and then that there was this idea that it had a fern flower even though it doesn't flower, but that there was like this idea that on the solstice that it did. I think that
Mm.
there was just I don't know, I think there's something uh, interesting about finding different ways of thinking through these things and just like questioning what our like usual symbols are, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
I think that kind of brings up a question that I had that I think would be good to like speak about for people who maybe don't know what autofiction is and like what it can what you're kind of doing with it and what it can achieve, and maybe also its relationship to your visual practice as well. So like I know that there's probably lots of definitions of it, but like how do you see it and how do you kind of find that you use that form? um
Yeah, I think it's really interesting the like the use of the eye, because sometimes like every once in a while like, I'll get in my head and be like, oh, it's kind of like narcissistic and then I'm like no, like like trying to like push against that, and I found a really nice quote but I can't remember who said it, but I was like, oh, this is like really a nice way of thinking about it. It's that like a power can speak from like a position of authority. It doesn't need the first person because it has the authority to speak for more
Okay,
than
yeah, yeah.
whereas everybody else has to use the I because you don't have the power. So it's a way of like combating it. Or like trying to like chip at the authority of something is like using the
Mm.
I. Um, and I guess I like having like a really close relationship with like the reader or listener or like person who is like experiencing the work. And I feel like using a kind of girlish voice or kind of diaristic voice is like really handy for that.
Yeah.
And that it like creates kind of like hopefully like a kind of intense engagement with the work is kind of what I'm going
Yeah.
for. And then yeah, I guess because looking at the idea of like Mother Ireland and trying to like see how that like because like it's really old, like where it comes from and that, but it's like trying to see how it still is relevant and influences like how we construct identity today and how we like literally like move through space today. So I think using the eye and like my own experiences and expanding outwards from that is like a good way of like highlighting or even just exploring the relevance of it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
totally. I think that's a really good kind of summary because actually there's a moment in the text where you say I'm going to tell you about, and or almost as if you're like waiting to hear like what do you think this means? Like what like what's your interpretation of this like very strange dream that I had and that I'm struggling to kind of understand myself. And you almost want to like reply, which is not an experience that I've had a lot in these previous episodes of the podcast, because no one's really made a piece that feels like they're really speaking into the microphone to the listener. So yeah, that was like quite a kind of almost eerie experience, because you want to be like, I want to tell you how I feel, that was really, really cool and really effective.
That's nice, because I think because I like when I say like the idea that I like tracing back the Mother Helen figure to like, or like seeing like colonial influences on that and like trying to relate it back to like maybe just like other imagery of women. Like I'm not like I'm just like interested in exploring or seeing like what other people think about that, or like how, I guess just more of an observer than like a strong researcher or something. And then just like,
Yeah.
so I like to keep the looseness of the narrative as a way of being like, uh here are some like connecting thoughts. So
Yeah.
like, yeah, rather than it being like this is what I have researched and I'm presenting, you know?
Yeah. And I know you mentioned like Beckett winning the Nobel Prize 1969, and obviously the Beckett references feel so like obvious to someone who maybe is like, who knows about Beckett, but they're like the kind of breaking the fourth wall type stuff. There's one line from Endgame that kind of reminded me of the absurdity of some of this, which was like, one of the characters says, what keeps me here? And the other one says, the dialogue. And like that kind of energy is so clear in this. And like, yeah, the construction of narrative, the construction of identity, the like performance of ego, all of these things that are so interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I like the idea of using Beckett in the story as somebody who was um, yeah, able to see like story constructs. So I guess like as a kind of like, um, what's the word? Like foil to like the kind
Yeah.
of like the hubbub around like Michael Collins and De Valera, and then like a
Yeah.
figure who's just like sees stories, or sees like the framework of things. And then I guess the WW book that I wrote, that was like when I did like the performance stuff, that was like really heavily inspired by like Crop's last tape. And then I guess in some ways like the idea of Mary being on her bed telling her dreams, and like like there's a little bit of like Malone dies as well, of like not that she's on her deathbed, although I don't know, I haven't finished yet, so maybe she is on her deathbed, I
Yeah.
don't know. But yeah, and there's like a really nice line in that as well, about like he's like, oh, if I had the use of my body, I'd throw it out the window, but maybe it's the thought that, or maybe it's the thought of the impotence that like emboldens me to that. And that like I think it's so funny.
Yeah.
But also like it's just, yeah, it's just like I feel like it's just like someone who really well like sees how we tell ourselves stories, even, or just like the limitation of that thought because of the limitation of the body or something. I just find that really, really interesting.
Yeah. And also within the text, even though, okay, so we know it's the voice of Mary speaking, telling us about her dreams, but there's all these really specific historical and literary references. So there's like William Martin Murphy, there's Jim Larkin, there's Beckett, there's Eamon de Valera, there's Michael Collins, the astronaut, and Michael Collins, kind of also the Irish revolutionary. And these are all like really specific figures. But then the symbolism of women, and this is something that I've been thinking about as well in my own work, is like, is always archetypal or general or like kind of like whore Madonna kind of dichotomy, but then these kind of like men statues that are like, this is the year he was born, this is the year he died, whereas like Molly Malone in Dublin has no, like, there's actually no proof that she ever existed, and same with, there used to be the Anna Livia Plurabelle statue in Dublin. There's no longer. I'm sure in Cork there's lots of kind of Virgin Mary statues and stuff like that, but they're never, well, rarely specific. Even Phil Lynott, that's another reference that you made to a specific man. There's like so many. It's really interesting.
Yeah, isn't there's some statistic for like I think is there like four statues of women in Dublin or something, and then like three of them aren't even real women.
Yeah.
Like so that they're like fictions or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is really interesting how there's like the agents of like the stories, and then there's like this kind of like weaving together of a woman that like is I guess the relationship between women and dreams and this kind of like progression um of an idea is very interesting.
Yeah. And this idea that women have access to otherworldly knowledge, or like should have this otherworldly impetus. At least in Ireland it was like independence was like almost the responsibility of women. It was like, if you stay pure, if the land is pure, the Brits are impure, women have to be this like kind of carrier of purity, through like Virgin Mary type imagery.
Yeah, and it's I think because there's like that Anne Curley documentary as well about Mother Ireland, and then
Oh
it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
yeah, like the kind of like what happened in the north then when like women like really took on like I guess they take on the persona of it in like Pursuit of Independence afterwards as well, like, and it is just it's interesting uh when something gets like retold back onto you.
Mm,
And I guess that's why there's because I guess we talked about poems, but I guess there's like the idea of the song as well is in there. And I've always been really into song lyrics and like in writing and stuff. And I couldn't I yeah I just think there's something really magical about songs and how lyrics kind of stay with you and this kind of like
mm,
constructing the meaning around them. And also how like so many songs are like kind of like she songs or about like a she, like an anonymous she,
yeah.
um, which is really interesting to me.
I gave you poems to say is kind of like I, the man who has who has the poems, who has the depth, gives it to
Yeah,
you, the person who projects meaning, or it's just really effective as an image, I think.
yeah, it's so interesting because I think I love that poem and I think it's beautiful and I love like the renditions of it and then also the fact that so many people do different covers of it is really
Yeah.
interesting as well and like in put a different meaning onto it and I like used to think that verse in particular was like so romantic and like I was like oh
Yeah.
someone writing poems for me to say of course
Yeah.
that sounds lovely but then
Yeah.
when you're like yeah it's just like when you think about it just a little bit longer you're like oh like that's like weird. And then like I guess like for from a female perspective of being like I gave you poems to say, but I guess even just like um broader than that of just like how stories get told and like how we inherit things. Like like I feel like our parents would have learned off so much like
Oh yeah.
poetry when they went to school and it's just like really um yeah, it's funny how stories and what stories get passed down, I guess is just very
Yeah,
interesting.
definitely.
Um,
Actually, there's something like quite hauntological about the whole piece. So, like this line that Willie Martin Murphy says, "We don't die, and the greatest trick we've ever managed to pull is to convince people that we do." Um, Again, is like these kind of like nostalgic memories of Ireland that still kind of haunt, and or that like this kind of archetypal woman still haunts, but also like hauntology uh kind of seems to always inhabit this like 1960s 1970s kind of era. It's like, this dream of the future that part of the history had that never came to be, like the hope of the moon landing, the hope of like, that hippies had, and like, and like at the time there was much better, like, you talk about queuing up for job seekers, and or Mary talks about it, which is a great image in itself, that
yeah,
this
yes,
archetypal
Mary.
figure would be like queuing up to get her, for British listeners, universal credit type thing, and yeah, so that, and then, you know, the man who didn't die, you know, like Collins literally being the ghost of Michael Collins, but also kind of, I guess, almost like embodying the American astronaut. Or but then it's also like much more global than just the Irish story, because I imagine the American astronaut Michael Collins was of Irish origin. Yeah, and you know, that haunting story of emigration from Ireland. I think it's Edna O'Brien who says that she writes about Ireland from the UK because something in her tells her that she has to, and she couldn't do it from Ireland because it would just be too close and she wouldn't be able to see it properly. And how the culture of emigration never ended after the famine, like it just keeps going. And obviously that's something that Simon Harris has been talking about recently, trying to get everyone back from Australia.
He's gonna get the kids back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my god. That,
Even
what a
though they
horrendous
do
image.
everything they can to make it impossible for young people to live in Ireland.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just this kind of like haunting image of like land ownership, and then that being projected literally astronomically to the moon. And you know, the question that you bring up of colonization, colonialism. There's a really good line. Let the dream of the empire die, which is something that feels so relevant with what's happening in Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen, Sudan. Like this is like, it has such specific Irish context because that's what you know and that's how you relate to the world. And you know, that history of Ireland you're speaking about, that's formed how both you and I maybe see the world because that's where we grew up. But it's asking much more global questions than just the Irish context. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, I've so many thoughts. Yeah, that there so I'm reading a really good book at the minute. And it's like Ireland and the Unfinished Revolution.
Mm,
And or yeah, Ireland Colonialism and the Unfinished Revolution. I think
that
that's what
sounds
it's called.
great.
It's really, really good. I'm really slowly making my way through it, but it's
Yeah.
so I feel like there's something interesting about like whether or not Ireland was the first colony, but that like our relationship to the idea of colonialism. Yeah, I just feel like our thinking should be more progressed in terms of like how we see like other conflicts playing out. So yeah, I guess the idea of like the 1969 being when we landed on the moon, but also like when things really like started to get bad in the north with the troubles, and like how these like how there's like a blind side in seeing like the idea of like continuing to colonize the planet or like how these are like it's just like it's the same story and it's so upsetting and the yeah, I guess the Irish diaspora then is like been on my thinking a lot as well because of this book. And I feel like it was something that was like spoken an awful lot about when we were younger, particularly about like the Irish in America, and maybe it had something to do with like their legal status at the time. But I feel like it used to be a really big news story when we were younger, and
Oh,
it's not.
yeah.
Yeah, it used to be
I
all the
think
time.
it's
And
I think it's because Trump got rid of the visa for Irish people. So
okay,
that
yeah.
means we're not going over as much for jobs, and that's why I think it's now Canada and Australia and all of that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, but it's I don't know, it's interesting to think of it. Yeah, I guess like I like the idea of it being like it's the specifics to like look at like the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And I guess what you're saying about like the hauntology, like being around the 60s or the 70s, and like how maybe like we find it hard to like see images of the future now or like to imagine a future. And I guess I wrote like particularly that dream bit um in like around the time where I work in an art center in Cork and they were doing an exhibition with Anton Vidockel, who's like really big into cosmism, which is like this idea, this like I guess like an idea originating in like Russia where um that like that dying isn't necessarily something that humans should or should do, that have to do, like basically that like, oh, we could overcome mortality and that we should like work together to overcome mortality. And then like there's like a whole like the Nikolai Fedorov is like the main philosopher in it, and there's like a whole ream of ideas around it, and that like we'd bring everyone back from the dead, and then there'd be so many people that we'd have to like go to different planets or whatever, to like populate them with all like the people who've been brought back.
Yeah.
And there's something about it that I fucking hate as an idea, but then there's something that about it that I'm like, oh, it's really nice to think about the future in like a positive or an optimistic way, or to think
Yeah.
about to think these kind of like ideas that like, oh, what we could do is like work with science and work with this, and that like we would like have this really like utopic future or whatever.
Yeah.
But then there's like a bit about where, yeah, the Fedorov is basically saying like how horrible death is, and that like we live on a planet where we're like breathing in the dust and like the death of our dead ancestors, and like that, like what a horrific nightmare image. And it just makes me think of like the Joyce the line from the dead, where it's like, oh, like the snow falling and all the living and the dead. And I'm like, that's, I feel like in Ireland that's like, or not even Ireland, I just think there's like maybe a mindset that like I just find that really beautiful, and the idea that like people go like are surrounded by our ancestors in that kind of like matter way is like really, it's really beautiful to me.
Yeah.
So then I don't know, that it's funny that the idea of two schools of thought, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
is quite like I think Ireland has a particularly good relationship with death, weirdly, you know, like the Irish wake is a tradition, all these kind of like old pagan rituals that still survive with like covering mirrors. I know, and not probably many people do it anymore, but like the idea of opening a window when someone dies, like all of these kinds of things. But of course it is very feared, and yeah, ego and death, I suppose, are two big themes in the West.
Yeah. Well, sorry, just on the idea of the death thing, because the Mancon Magan, I was at
Oh
like
yeah.
a talk thing that he was doing recently, and it was really good. And just the idea that maybe that in Irish mythology, like death was kind of more like the beginning of something. So like saying like
Mm,
the idea of empire die, that like, it's like time for something new to start, or like
yeah.
that like death could be a positive thing in some ways. And
Yeah.
then how that relates to, I think we talked about this before as well, about the Shannon and the River Shannon, and how like that the Irish folklore tale that like this woman Shannon went to drink the bubbles, that would give her like knowledge,
Yeah.
and then basically she goes to drink, and she, in the retelling of it, she drowns and she becomes the River Shannon. And how there's like two ways of looking at that story, of being like, oh, she was like punished for trying to be like above herself, but then there's also a way of looking at that story of being like, oh, she like got the knowledge and she became the land, and like it was like she didn't die, it's like a new beginning.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
like, yeah, how you can interpret it different ways.
Even the salmon of knowledge, like the death of the salmon is what gives you the knowledge, you know, and eating it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is this relationship to like or just acknowledging the kind of cycle of nature and energy transmission and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It makes me, I've been reading a lot about horror and speculative fiction writing for my PhD, and in terms of like horror, there's this book that I was reading called In the Dust of Our Planet by Eugene Thacker, where he says that in the era of natural disasters, climate change, global pandemics, and the ongoing specter of bioterror, we are continually invited to think about humanity and its relation to its real, hypotheoretical, and speculative extinction. And I think extinction is actually the thing that we are all thinking about. You know, I watched a documentary on Netflix about the 5 mass extinctions throughout the dawn of time. And, you know, obviously that old saying, we've only been here for like a speck of time.
Yeah.
But the time is coming up for another mass extinction. Also, it would be interesting to maybe briefly talk about the kind of theme of love and light, and how you felt like it maybe filtered its way into the work, or how you thought about it while you were making it, or if not at all. Because it's such a kind of broad notion. And that's what I think is good about it, in that you could kind of see it as like not love or not light, or you could really embrace those two things or see the nuance in it. So yeah, it'd be good to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I guess the light, like I think of Mary as like a very like as a nice character to embody, because they have like a lightness or a kind of a mischievousness about the voice, and um yeah, there's like kind of like a malleableness. That's not how you say that, but and then I guess I was thinking about songs as well in relation to I don't know. I guess in relation to like love, and how like I was thinking, do you know, Berger has that like idea about songs that like they are like narrating like a past experience, and then that like they're sang in the present, but
Mm.
then they're always like hoping for this kind of future year, or like this kind of like there's like a they're able to like cross like temporally like these different moments. And I think there's something really nice about like yeah, songs in relation to the idea of love and this kind of like future year that would find them. And I guess as well the kind of like intimacy of Mary, of like hoping to find an ear of someone to like listen to her dreams. Um
It's also like this ego of the artist of like, I have to produce something that someone will see or listen to, so that my voice,
yeah.
or that this thing that sometimes feels otherworldly is like shown to people, because we were talking about this before we started recording, like the idea of like channeling something and taking a step back from it and being like, wait, did I make this? Was this me? Was it Mary? Was it someone else?
Yeah, and I think there's something really nice about like bringing it to an audience and being like, oh, like what is this? Like, let's figure out what this is. So in a way, like being like, oh, I had a dream, and like, let's decipher it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's like a real kind of feeling of like um community, like interpretation of art as well, like um just thinking about love in that way. um and also just like the kind of thing of like, you spoke about girlhood, and recently been thinking about like gossip, and how originally the word gossip, I mean, don't quote me on this, but I think originally it had quite positive connotations as a word. I think it's of Greek origin, the etymology.
yeah. It was like a word for like another woman. It's in Sylvia Federici's
Right.
yeah. It's like yeah, that it was like an kind of a word for like a gossip was like someone in the community who was like oh, they had something to do with like child rearing and that
Right.
yeah.
It's like this kind of like woman again who's got this kind of like canny knowledge that is able to access something extra textual, maybe that like other people aren't, through a kind of nuanced view of life. And yeah, like the way it's just used so negatively against women. I think you like re-embracing that sort of like voice is just really cool.
Yeah, I feel like there's something really fun about like leading into that like part of your person of my personality that like I guess is something that like would have embarrassed me before, or like would have been like I don't know, it's just one of those attributes of femaleness that you're like oh like yeah, that you're just kind of taught to like not like about yourself.
Yeah.
And then yeah, I read a really good quote that was like, oh, everyone is female and everyone hates it. That it's kind of like the idea is that yeah, the very like girlishness are the
Hmm.
things that were like, oh, I have to be like serious and present my ideas now or whatever. But I thought like playing with the idea of like telling your most deep thinking in this voice is like yeah, a nice way of like subverting that or like leaning
Yeah.
into it more, I guess. Yeah. or it
definitely.
highlighting that that's how it happens. Yeah, yeah.
And I've been thinking about it a lot in relation to, I'm just at the moment thinking a lot about like surrealist painting. And I read a book called Women in Surrealism by Whitney Chadwick, where she talks about how, well, she explains the notion of like the surrealist movement, where they talked about, similarly to what you described of the Irish Ashlyn figure of the muse, you know, like she comes to you and she's this otherworldly vision and she tells you the secret, you know, and then you paint it or whatever. And then that was something that was kind of reappropriated by the women in surrealist, the surrealist movement, where they used images of secrecy like keys or cloaks or like anything that would shroud something in mystery, to kind of, yeah, really like embody and subvert that image of the muse. And I guess, yeah, that muse archetype has for so long just has, like, you know, when Jung writes about the archetypes, he talks about how they're just age old, like they came with humanity, or they were there before, they're part of the collective unconscious. So why are they the way that they are, and they
Yeah,
manifest. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I find it really interesting when people are able to um, like expose like older stories, but that there's different ways of like interpreting it. Like even just like people who are able to like read the Bible in different ways or whatever, and they're
Yeah.
like, you can look at it like this or you can look at it like that, but because you've
Yeah.
only ever looked at it one way, that's the way that you see it. And
Yeah.
yeah, there yeah, there's something very interesting about the idea of these like archetypes that like uh I guess in relation to like say the story of the Shonen again, that like you would think, yeah, of course that was like a punishment because that's the only way that you've been told the story, and then you're like, oh well, like if you that wasn't your belief system at the time, that like becoming the land was like a positive thing, then
Yeah.
that's a really like uplifting story and empowering story for women,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, it's like it's funny because yeah, they are um age old ideas, but I feel like there's different ways of framing them that are more useful or something. Like yeah.
Yeah. That's so true. um I think about it a lot, like in relation to the tarot cards, just not as like divination tools whatsoever, but like just as like ways of clearly demonstrating like very specific archetypes of men and women. Um,
Mm.
like the hermit being this wise old man, or, you know, the empress being this kind of regal woman with like otherworldly knowledge, or yeah, it's just,
Mhm.
yeah, really really interesting.
I guess in like the text at some point I hope to make this link with Gilmore Girls that like because I'm just thinking about I don't know, I guess thinking broadly about the idea of the Irish diaspora and like ideas like
Hmm.
spreading out or whatever, yeah, that like, and also how like how Halloween made it over to America, and like how Halloween is like Samhain, like an Irish um pagan festival. So I was thinking about the idea of like how Gilmore Girls is like three women, like so there's like grandmother and like the daughter Lorelai, and then who also has a daughter Rory, and it's like three women, and that often like there's like you know the there's like the young woman, like the kind of like hag, and like this kind of like goddess, like embodying like the three different figures. So I was thinking about that, thinking about like Gilmore Girls in relation that it's like one. Oh, like one figure because they're like so obsessed with the seasons as well and their storytelling, and like how
Yeah.
people watch it in autumn as well, or like around like Samhain, and like how it, I don't know, I feel like there's just something really interesting how that storytelling fits a lot of like similar um like Irish folklore, and
Yeah.
yeah, I guess I like seeing like things repeating and seeing how they like slightly change. So I
Yeah.
don't know, I'm trying to make some kind of link between Gilmore Girls and Irish folklore, but we'll see how
That sounds great.
that
Well, I think that's
goes.
one of the things that you're so good at doing in your writing, and maybe this is something that writing lets you do that painting doesn't, which is like really delving into the kind of these really kind of modern references to these kind of like, yeah, to this like, you know, oral tradition kind of concept of folklore, and again just like that Irish perspective on a global scale, because of like the diaspora and stuff like that. It's just, yeah, it's really, I think it's something we're seeing a lot more in Ireland, like all this kind of reemergence of trad folk, but being rewritten in modern, like, like the Mary Wallopers and Lankum and all, and it just feels like there's some kind of attempt to hold on to something, or to bring something. It's like a second Irish revival almost, but hopefully a
Yeah,
much more inclusive one.
yeah. I think Irla Ní Fioris,
Yeah.
they wrote like a really good essay for Cian Benson Bale's exhibition in the Project Art Centre, and it was like basically, yeah, like the Celtic revival, like part two kind of idea, and that it's like maybe coming at it from more inclusive like perspective, and also like I guess like looking at that relationship with the land, because I think Megan makes really like lovely points about how like Ireland is like one of the only like white countries in Europe to have this like a kind of indigenous relationship with the land, and that we have like quite rich storytelling that we could like tap into. That we're like have a unique perspective in that sense, and then there's like an interesting perspective in like the colonial sense. And yeah, I think that essay by Irla is actually really interesting. It's like quite short, but like it's just that I feel like, yeah, I feel like there needs to be more thinking done on it. This kind of like revival
Yeah,
of
yeah,
like,
definitely.
because it's really big in music, like you say, like
Yeah.
yeah,
But
it's
then there's
interesting.
always that danger with this kind of like nationalism where it can become, it can go too far. So like
Yeah,
something I thought a lot about was, Irish kind of exceptionalism with like the sense of being a victim still, whereas
mhm,
like when Irish people went to America, maybe on the coffin ships, yes, they was like no shirt, no shoes, no Irish or whatever, but like, come on, we had the white skin to get to places, and after a couple of generations that kind of faded away. um
yeah,
so
yeah. I think it's like about like you say, like seeing it from uh like using it as like a way of being like, oh, our experience, which is not our experience now, and like looking at like our like from the privilege of our position where we are now,
yeah,
like how, yeah, it's like the uniqueness of that, of like having this like experience that can inform how we like want to approach like yeah, how we're perceived in the future, I guess. Yeah, I was saying that big, yeah, that you're right. Like it's not about like it's not about nations, I guess. It's
no,
like, or like, yeah, it's about the perspective or the experience.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the great thing about a lot of this new movement in music in Ireland. I'm so in love with that song by Lankum, Dainta and Erin, which means made in Ireland, where they talk about being the land of saints and scholars, but actually you end up having to live. I think he uses New York as an example because the apartments and flats in Ireland are just impossible to afford for
Yeah.
people there, so they have to leave, and there is a government that encourages that leaving of young people, and makes it impossible for us to afford to stay there. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
a lot to do, a lot to fix, but yeah, I think it's so cool to hear that perspective be used in your work in kind of a really modern way of thinking about it, and how it applies to like someone who is in line for job seekers allowance, or who is working as an artist and probably needs job seekers allowance in Ireland. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's something nice about writing that like lets you like occupy that more
atemporal
fl
kind of.
yeah, yeah, it's like very fluid, and you're like able to move around. Because I guess like the painting for me is like quite like like a way of like occupying like landscape in like a very bodily way, and
Mhm.
like thinking through ideas about like representation of women, or like this idea of like occupying like being a cultural maker rather than a cultural symbol, and that kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah,
yeah, and like that's like very physical for me, but I think there's something about their writing that's like so mentally like what's the word? Like fun, I guess, yeah. Just like it's just very there's something like I guess the idea of the autofiction as being this very like expansive way of thinking and not having to like limit yourself um to inherited storytelling techniques, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And that kind of Irish tradition is so based on inherited stories. So it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just working on so many different kind of levels and in a really nuanced way. Part of this work was originally published as a text on Map magazine. And you can find more from Sarah at her website, sarahlongartist.wordpress.com. Accompanying images and video for this episode are at our website, and there are links to all of this in the episode description as always. Listeners on Spotify are able to experience an accompanying video to this episode by artist Sapphire Goss. And for listeners on other platforms, you can find Sapphire's work on our website. All of this will also be included in the episode description. Sapphire Goss is an artist who works with moving image, photography, and other lens-based methods. Using obsolete technologies, she creates chimerical imagery using unexpected materials, looping and processing to make an analog uncanny, grainy, shimmering, otherworldly bursts of light and emotion that are both moving and mysterious. Thank you for listening to the Fermynwoods Contemporary Art Podcast. If you enjoy our podcast, please make sure to positively rate, review, and subscribe. It helps other people find the podcast and it makes us feel really good about ourselves. This episode has been curated by Subterra and presented by me, Marie-Chantal Hamrock, and edited by Astrid Björklund. Love and Light is Fermynwoods Contemporary Art's new thematic program. Visit fermynwoods.org for more information on the program and to sign up to our monthly email newsletter. Follow us at Fermynwoods on X, Instagram, and Facebook. And make sure to check out myself and Astrid on Subterra at Subterrestrials on Instagram. Thank you for listening. With love and light, Marie and Astrid.